Okay, I would like to call the meeting to order of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management for Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. Christopher, would you like to just run through a roll call just for the sake
Happy to do so, Chair. Councillor Brockington.
I am here.
Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor DeBruz.
Here.
Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Councillor Hubley. Councillor Hubley, maybe not yet.
he'll be just a smidge late, he informed me.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
And Vice Chair Menard.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest? None. Confirmation minutes for the meeting of Tuesday, April 19th. Are those minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you so much. Communications, we have a response to inquiry. Effectiveness and enforceability of anti-idling bylaw. I know Councillor Menard would like to add this to the subsequent agenda for our June meeting, so I will kick that to Councillor Menard. I don't know if you do a motion on that or just approval from the committee that we're going to add it to the next agenda, so it'll appear on that June committee with the intent of having the ability for people to come speak to it, and of course Councillor Menard can action anything on that if he so wishes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that approved by the committee to lift that to the next meeting?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Our first item on the agenda is going to be a presentation from our good friends at the Ottawa Climate Action Fund and Steve Winkleman, who's the executive director there. You may remember Steve. He came and spoke to us when we were approving Energy Evolution back in the fall of 2020. He invited me to sit on the advisory board for Ottawa Climate Action Fund, and I know Steve Willis and Andrea Flowers are also engaged with OCAF, and we've just invited them here today just to provide an update on the work that they do, because it is really a part of that collaborative effort that we approved as a part of Energy Evolution, in that whole we can't do this alone, and OCAF really embodies that, and they look to bring partners together to advance some of the initiatives at the community level for what we're looking for in Energy Evolution. So we'll come back to that. Item number 2 is the motion that was put forward in the April council meeting that was then brought here. So that's item number 2 on renewable energy. We'll come back to that. Item 3 is a status update on Standing Committee Environmental Protection, Water, Waste Management inquiries and motions of the period ending 6th of May 2022. Can we receive that report?
Received.
Received. Then we have information previously distributed. Use of delegated authority during 2021 by Revenue Services under Schedule B of Bylaw 2022-29 as amended by Bylaw 2022-77. Sorry, hate to screw up my bylaws. I'm not sure what it would mean at the end of the day if I said it was amended by Bylaw 2022-27. I don't even know what Bylaw 2022-27 is, but I said it, and who knows? But anyways, it is 77, not 27. So for the record. All right, thank you. So we'll go back to item 1. Steve Winkleman is standing by and ready to present to us.
He's just being promoted to panelist, Chair.
Excellent. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Good. Well, let me see if the screen share works. And you're seeing it, Councillor Moffat?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the chance to speak to the Standing Committee. Look forward to doing it in person sometime. The Ottawa Climate Action Fund is being incubated by the Ottawa Community Foundation. And as you know, we are one of 7 Low Carbon Cities Canada LC3 centers modeled after the Atmospheric Fund in Toronto. Our big sister, we have a $22 million federal endowment that we live off of, about a $1 million operating budget. We, again, are incubated within the Ottawa Community Foundation. We have an MOU with the city to help meet energy evolution goals, and our mission is to accelerate the transition Ottawa's transition to an equitable carbon neutral future. We know that time is not on our side, right? In terms of bending the curve on emissions, in terms of avoiding the worst impacts of climate change, which in Ottawa include hotter, wetter, more extreme weather, and more freeze-thaw cycles. Climate change, as you know, is a threat multiplier, exacerbating physical, social, and economic risks to critical infrastructure, access to services, health impacts, especially for the most vulnerable in terms of heat and strokes, reduced or increased water pollution and air pollution, and economic impacts on infrastructure, on business interruption. And of course, if we flip that around and address climate change, it can open multiple benefits, including increased return on investments in public and private infrastructure, green jobs, business revenues, etc. So OCAF focuses on where the carbon is, 90% from buildings and transportation, also 15-minute neighborhoods, the connective tissue between where we live and where we go. Our motto is carbon down and community up. Big words, especially the second part of it, but the fact that we're within the Community Foundation with a track record, with the relationships with the networks, gives us confidence that we can deliver on both. But it's not about us, and it's not about you either. It's really about all of us working together, public, private, philanthropic, community, investors, utilities, because transformative climate action is only possible when the majority opt in. OCAF works to advance the business case and the community case for net zero. We have a 10-person advisory board with experience in public sector, private, nonprofit, charity, academia, and the Ottawa Community Foundation's CEO, Marco Pagani, really had the vision to incubate OCAF within the Community Foundation. Our strategic goals are to enhance the capacity of Ottawa's climate action ecosystem, to grow Ottawa's green pipeline of low carbon investments. We're not against all pipelines. Invest in flagship projects that inform and inspire replication, and broker iconic partnerships that bring meaningful impacts. One example of that is the Ottawa Climate Equity Initiative. We brought in almost $400,000 from Environment and Climate Change Canada to bring together leaders from climate change groups in Ottawa and social inclusion groups from Ottawans of African and Caribbean descent to people working on housing security, food security, new immigrants, Indigenous youth. Why? Just to get to know each other. Who are you? What do you do? What do you care about? What do we have in common? In order to then co-create communication products and develop collaboration action plans. So we will be sharing some of that in the next week or so, what's come out of this initiative in terms of focus on green jobs, walkable communities, better engaging the Francophone community in Ottawa on environment, accessibility. But fundamentally, what we really wanted to do here is going to be a lot of federal money coming with a climate change focus, with a emphasis on social inclusion, and we wanted to make sure these weren't tokenistic relationships, that there are real relationships to build on, and that money can support the groups that are doing this work on the ground. So stay tuned on some of the outputs from that effort. So I'm not going to read all these numbers, but I'll let you know that the OCAF committee of the Ottawa Community Foundation, or advisory board, approved 6 grants totaling around $400,000, leveraging another more than $900,000 from a variety of funders, federal, local, etc., including the Community Foundation. And these all align with energy evolution priorities on buildings, on workforce, on electric vehicles, and even sewer heat, waste heat recovery, co-funded with the city and NCC. So I'm going to give you a few examples and happy to, during Q&A, come back to this if you like. Our first grant and then a follow-up grant, this is really 3 years of grants to EnviroCenter for their Future Homes Ottawa program, which complements the city's Better Buildings program that I'm sure you know EnviroCenter runs the website for them and does a lot of program support. In this case, phase 1 focused on neighborhood scale, deep retrofits, developing a net zero tool to help homeowners along that path to decarbonization, along that journey, identifying 6 homes for demonstration retrofits that will begin in the fall. The second phase, over the next 2 years, focuses on preparing Ottawa for mass retrofits, starting with 50, and with an important focus on bringing together the trade teams that are going to do those retrofits, including an emphasis on underrepresented and BIPOC companies, to figure out, to learn while doing, do the retrofits, but also assess what's going to be needed to scale this and accelerate it, and to position Ottawa to take advantage again of emerging federal support coming out of Budget 2022. Project that I'm especially proud of is this EV test drive concierge service, electric vehicle test drives. Now the formal launch of this is next week, so I can't spill too many beans, but I can tell you that this came out of a hackathon that the city's climate team did around electric vehicles. And coming out of that, OCAF and EnviroCenter, along with Comité and EVCO, responded to a proposal from Natural Resources Canada. They were successful, bringing in $300,000. So with money from Natural Resources Canada, from OCAF, from an anonymous donor at the Ottawa Community Foundation, we'll be launching this EV test drive concierge service, bringing 5 electric vehicles into Communito's fleet, which hasn't had any in Ottawa, to help reduce emissions, because the literature shows that exposure to EVs and actually driving them leads to increased sales. And by bringing in the car sharing element, we can not only reduce the carbon intensity of vehicles, but help reduce car ownership and driving. And it's a community up, because it's an EV experience for all Ottawans, not only people who can afford a vehicle. This has led to a spin-off with Ottawa Community Housing. It's Ontario's first fully electric car share that should launch in June, starting 1 vehicle, 1 charger, 1 parking spot at an OCH property, but to address a couple of things. Certainly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but with the potential at larger scale to reduce tenants' cost for vehicle ownership. Maybe they don't need 1 or 2 cars. Reduce parking costs. And for OCH, the promise and hope is to help reduce parking costs and to figure out at what scale would a combination of car sharing and bike sharing help alleviate the need to build more parking. And that's more money that could go into housing, and hopefully provide some models for private apartment buildings as well that could save money on parking and provide more and more affordable housing. So stay tuned on that. The green bubble of Ottawa I refer to lovingly and with some criticism. I don't know how big it is, maybe 15 to 20% of Ottawans who really are green keeners, who really put climate change as a top priority and put their money and their time into that. What about the other 80% of Ottawans? If we don't engage them meaningfully, we have no chance of meeting our goals. And so the city and OCAF have come together and co-funding a climate communications campaign to inform and empower Ottawans on climate change as citizens, as community members, as consumers, as businesses. And we've got to start with the fundamentals. What are the risks? Hotter, wetter, more extreme. Why? Buildings and transportation. That's where most of the emissions come from. And the solutions are about better buildings, better transportation, better neighborhoods. And I want to highlight heat pumps for a moment. As I say to anyone who will listen to me, heat pumps are probably the most important, least understood climate technology in Canada. Ottawa alone needs 500,000 of them over the next 20 years. And they're just not as sexy as electric vehicles or photovoltaics, but we need to try to help people understand them better. And they can not just get our homes off of heating with fossil gas, but can help prepare for warmer and hotter weather. Something that will probably be emphasized in this campaign. Another project in the works is some co-convening we'll be doing with Vivre en Ville, a Quebec-based group. We're calling it Common Ground to advance smart densification in Ottawa. To unpack our concerns and fears about intensification, maybe laugh at ourselves, those of us who cried when the growth boundary was expanded but don't want intensification in the neighborhood, and identify common priorities and key challenges. And of course, there are real challenges like transitioning, parking from where we are now to hopefully less of it. This obviously supports intensification goals in the official plan in 15-minute communities. And why is OCAF concerned about this? Because a book I co-wrote almost 15 years ago called Growing Cooler basically lays out the case. Land use policy is climate policy. It's housing policy, it's transportation policy, it's economic policy. If you look at the analysis that went into energy evolution by SSG, you can see that folks in the core drive 0, 2, 3, 4,000 kilometers per year. And that goes out to 5, 6, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, up to 19 as you get way out. And the energy evolution modeling shows that meeting intensification goals would cut driving in half compared to business as planned. But there's also a big price tag for Ottawans and for the city. And the story goes something like this, and you know it well. The market undersupplies walkable, complete 15-minute neighborhoods. That's a key factor for increasing housing prices and can lead to sprawl as would-be homeowners drive until they can qualify for a mortgage and wind up spending twice as much on transportation. And as you know, that increases infrastructure costs for the city, where a low-density unit may cost $400 or more in terms of services and infrastructure, whereas an infill unit can generate $600 in revenues. I'd love to see in the analysis for the transportation master plan some land use scenarios that sort of cost this out for the city. And I'm sure you can come up with great things to do with those increased revenues from infill. I hope a lot of that will go to climate and affordable housing, but we need those numbers. A couple things under exploration, applying machine learning to commercial retrofits, developing a commercial retrofit accelerator. We'll do some convening around geothermal and wastewater heat recovery, continuing to work on low carbon workforce, and revisiting bike sharing. I don't think it's been done right. It clearly hasn't in Ottawa. There's some great models out there, bringing in corporate sponsorship, bringing in electric assist bikes with an equity focus, and we're in some initial discussions with Enviro Center about exploring that. I'm going to leave you with a few closing thoughts. Last two slides. Return on investment. You already know that energy evolution, an investment of $60 billion, is going to generate about $90 billion in gross benefits. I'm going to submit that $87 billion is a conservative estimate of benefits because it excludes co-benefits, jobs, health, infrastructure, increased municipal revenues, business sales. But we're going to have to invest to get that return, put our money where the emergency is. And I'll note the city climate team is already catalyzing significant federal and private investment, such as through the Better Homes Loan Program, and going to need more resources to continue along this essential path. We've got to ask the climate question. Are policies, plans, projects making it better or worse on emissions, increasing or decreasing? Are they increasing vulnerability or increasing resilience? And by taking life cycle costing approach, including co-benefits, including scenario analysis, including embedded carbon, we can get at better asset management, integrate climate change into asset management to provide that required level of service, minimize costs, and maximize benefits. Finally, let's look at how we can integrate adaptation and mitigation. Measures such as green infrastructure, which can both help mitigate flood, help mitigate urban heat island, help shade buildings, distributed energy, walkable communities, can all reduce emissions as well as increase the resilience of our communities and our economy to climate change. Appreciate your attention and look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Steve. Really appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation and just how you really bring together all the aspects of what the city's been doing the last few years, from the official plan, transportation master plan, climate change master plan, and how it all really ties together. And that's kind of the theme that we were certainly putting forward when we did the official plan, is how all these other things sort of piece together. And it's all important no matter where you live in the city. There's, one of the things I've always pushed for is preserving agricultural land. Well, you see that's not just about farming, that's also about climate, that's also about, intensification, these different things. It all pieces together. From whether it's rural, suburban, or urban, there's the work that OCAF does has a benefit to all communities. So I felt it was important for you to present that here the way, and also, you talked about adaptation, mitigation in June. We are expecting those plans to come forward, and we're having more discussion on adaptation, mitigation, also looking ahead to the next term of council from a funding perspective and where we need to go with that. That's going to be a conversation we have at this committee in June. So it all tees up quite well. So we do have some questions for you, Steve. Start with Councillor Menard, our Vice Chair.
Thanks so much, Chair. Great presentation, Steve. Really nice to see you here, and thanks for putting it all together, as the Chair said. Some interesting ideas, and I think I'm really hoping to pick your brain a little bit on maybe some of the research you've done in other cities and how we can get there. So I think you've seen in Ottawa, transportation buildings, those are the main focus for reducing our emissions and can really help us on cost as well. And so some of the things that we've been looking at is around retrofitting our buildings. You mentioned heat pumps, and that's a major one, of course. But I'm wondering just your thoughts around retrofits to buildings beyond just the no interest loans we've put in place. How do we get to a point where we've got residences that are doing this on their own, either through other incentive programs or just through information to lower costs and reduce emissions? What your ideas are on retrofits to buildings. And I think bang for your buck is always important in these conversations. The other one I'll just mention, maybe I'll just go through all 3 or 4 I'm going to talk about. Then I just want to mention is the bike share piece. So we had a report on the table. It'd be a $4 million upfront investment, and then depending on the cost share model after that, a $500,000 a year expenditure to connect to our, again, $7 billion LRT investment. So this is one that I think we've looked at models in Toronto. Toronto runs it in-house. Staff have come back and said that an in-house model is best for Ottawa if we're going to proceed that way, given what's happened here before. Just wondering your thoughts on how we proceed there and getting that done. Another quick point I'll just raise is around a simple one, but one I just wanted to touch on is the research you've done around driving. And I guess you said you wrote a book on it. I'd love more information on that. Sorry if I'm not up to date on that, but just sprawl and where we house people in our city. Would love more information. I guess your PowerPoint is available in our shared drive as well, so that's fantastic. But just some more information on that. And the last one I'll just mention, it's a small but project that I mentioned sometimes is just the conversion for LED lights. It's just a simple one. We've done it in Ottawa around our street lights, and a good program that this council has invested in previously. But what can we do in the city to get just regular renters, owners to start this process? It's already been done by several people, but I think there's many homes that don't have that done. And does it make sense to have a small program that could help do that as an incentivization for lowering energy output and lowering costs as well? Thanks, Chair.
Is that all you got? Okay.
So for now, yeah, I could talk for hours with you on this stuff.
Love it, and let's do that as well. So on retrofits, are you talking both about residents as well as commercial? Just to clarify.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me just tell you one project that some convening we've been doing on financing deep retrofits of MURBs, of apartment buildings and condos, working with some of the key building owners, your Minto, your Osgood, and others. Ottawa Community Housing participates as well. Basically, the business case isn't there, and you can have a flagship project, and you can brag about a passive house building, and you can lock in some 25% savings, which is not trivial to do. And we're trying to figure out, what do we do in the middle there? How do we build that broader value proposition in terms of what it means for building owners? Maybe it's about tenant retention. For tenants, maybe it's about improved quality of life. But we're basically trying to advance that business case. And there's a lot of capital there, and there's a lot of interest there. But even the highest capacity building owners are struggling with sort of doing this at scale. So there's some important discussion there. I think we're working closely with the city's Better Buildings program. They're looking, at a commercial PACE effort to bring in some more low-cost financing for that. So some of it is about the money. A lot of it's about the collaboration and understanding. Ottawa Community Housing has done some tremendous things, and it's really nice to have deep subsidies. TAF is seeing this in Toronto too. Right now, you need those deep subsidies to go deep. So we're looking at building that business case and looking at the other pieces in terms of best practices, in terms of portfolio management and asset management. So the goal isn't necessarily, how do I make this building perfect, but how do I, across a portfolio of buildings, figure out how to do that? So that's on the commercial side. On the residential side, it's the same thing. Right now, with energy prices in Ottawa and lack of provincial subsidies, there's not a great payback case. There isn't a payback case for heat pumps. And of course, you don't do the heat pump without doing the air sealing and improving the thermal integrity of the building. So certainly Better Homes Loan Program, which, as you know, is already oversubscribed, and you're just city council helping, I guess, recapitalize, is seeing tremendous uptake. It's still I don't know, 500 homes, and we need to get to 20,000 a year. So it's a long way to say, I don't know exactly, except one piece we're looking at, we're calling, you know, about like granny suites, we're calling them greenie suites. So if you put in a basement apartment or a secondary suite, could you use that to generate some income? And consider that an efficiency measure. You got more people in the same building that you're heating and cooling. Hopefully it advances intensification goals as well. And then all of a sudden something that has no payback has broader payback. So we're looking at broader value proposition, because I think for most Ottawans, if there's no payback, sorry, you lost me. And so we're, you know, there's good stuff going on the workforce side, on building the capacity. And as prices come down, in terms of renewable energy, we're moving in that direction, but there's some fundamental barriers. I wish I had a better answer, but I can tell you across the LC3 network, everyone's struggling with this and looking at retrofit accelerators to try to overcome some of these barriers. But do you want to respond to that at all, right, before I jump to bike share, because I'm sort of okay.
No, just go through them. It's all good.
On driving, I'll send a link to an op-ed I did for corporate nights in the fall, which points to some of those books. One made the the first one made the climate change case for integrating land use, transportation, and housing. Growing cooler, then growing wealthier made the economic case. And importantly, it's not about one number. It's not about dollar per ton. It's about what are the benefits for individuals, for the private sector, for the government, in terms of cost savings, in terms of return on investment, in terms of quality of life. Because it's not about one number. It's finding where do you find yourself in that story, and where might you get involved, and how can you bring in sort of other resources. And it's an approach that applies to I think everything we're doing around climate change, or should do. And so there's a lot of evidence there. I mean, we know that places that are more dense and more complete, people drive less. What we don't know for sure is how much of Ottawa could we transition to that. But we do know we need to, and we do know there's interest, and so there's certainly work to do. And I think some encouragement in terms of projects we're already seeing. Bike share, I can't say a lot about right now in terms of the numbers. I was in Vancouver a couple months ago. They're doing it. Corporate sponsorship is huge. There's places where this is happening. New York, Toronto, with corporate sponsorship. Now, these are higher density cities, so that's a higher proposition. There's more market exposure to the advertiser, but that's sort of one revenue stream. As you know, I think you've looked at Hamilton's social bicycles, I think it's called. So I think there's more analysis to do here. EnviroCenter has the idea of more of a social enterprise model. I'm agnostic about who owns it and who runs it. I think it needs some more work, because there's a lot of guidebooks out there. There's a lot of experience in this space, and it's really increasing, and especially in a city like Ottawa, which has both higher density and low density. Bringing in the electric assist bike piece, I think, is going to help make those commutes a lot more practical for people. And I think some of the bike share attempts were more focused on tourists. Bike sharing is typically more on commuters. I have an idea. I talked to Stéphane Jaguer yesterday about Ottawa community housing. Of could we focus it on Ottawa community housing and really have a strong equity focus? He had an interesting idea of I don't know if he'll appreciate me sharing it, but just about scooters. And I don't mean like the Lime stand-up scooters for elderly people and people who have mobility limitations. Could there be a sharing of those types of four-wheel scooters to help people get around? And there could be other sort of resource streams to bring to that. So let me just say that I think there's worthy study to do there, to unpack this, to do it right, to scale it right and phase it right, and not just come in with some high-tech solution or something that's sort of too big. But I don't think Ottawa should be done yet with bike sharing. There's what to explore there. On the LED, I don't have a lot more to say, except that, one thing, whenever there's low-hanging fruit, it's better to package it with the more expensive stuff and use it at least as an entree to. You could save money on this, and then have ambassadors like EnviroCenter has with their energy auditors to help people understand, and here's what more you can do when you need to add air conditioning or replace your boiler or do whatever investment in the house.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just want to focus primarily on the heat pumps. You mentioned in your presentation a startling number that we need to aim towards converting by not too far away from now as far as a time period. Can you reference jurisdictions where this has been successful in getting people to understand that, number one of the greatest sources of GHGs comes from heating their homes, two, that the conversion from fossil fuel heat to a heat pump is the future, and how do we convince a large segment of the population to make this transition? How can they be incentivized to do it? I think this is a huge struggle. I'm only aware of a handful of residents in my ward who have done this, but you could share any best practices or thoughts. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, the lack of provincial incentives is a problem. There's much higher. I don't know the numbers. Happy to find them, but in Quebec, where they're significant, there's the Réno Vert and the Réno Climat programs that provided incentives for heat pumps. There is the $5,000 federal greener homes. It's not a lot. Takes a while to get to. They certainly can be financed within sort of Better Homes loan program. Provincial policy will help. I'm not holding my breath. So given that, that's where trying to look at things like these greenie suites, or there are other ways to sort of help finance that. But I think that's why we're in this climate communications campaign, just so people understand where the emissions are coming from and what's most important. And in Ottawa, it's how we heat our homes and it's how we move around. Period. Two things. People can remember two things. Andrew Flowers and I like to joke about, it's not about the plastic straws, people, or the plastic bags. Like, you know, you want to wash your bags, that's great and that's good, but we really have to help people understand how to focus. And that comes down to, what are those life activities? If you, again, the boiler dies, or you need to install air conditioning, that don't happen a lot, but for people who really care, maybe they were within the green bubble, this is the most important thing you can do. And let's cost that out. We're working on a little calculator with the city on this to understand, if it costs 10 grand, whatever it is, 12 grand to put a heat pump system in your house, which not all Ottawans can afford, but many could. You finance it over 5-10 years, talk about $1,000 per year. We're playing with, in the communications piece, like, all right, $1,000 a year, what might you spend on? How much are you going to spend on redoing that kitchen? And by the way, redoing the kitchen, people are excited about it. It's positive. A heat pump, what is that? And it's not, you know, so, but maybe comparing it to stuff, if you really care and you want to know what's important when you have to buy that next vehicle, or don't buy the next vehicle, do car share. So I think it's about trying to compare it to stuff that people might spend money on anyways, while we're also looking for increasing, incentives to make that happen. But starting with the fundamentals, let's get everyone on the same page. So through this climate communications campaign, we've been working with, we brought together Invest Ottawa, Board of Trade, Hydro Ottawa, the city, Garda Center in the fall, and we aim with the climate communications campaign. I guess this is going to be recorded, but it's really a climate literacy campaign, but that's paternalistic, but right. But let's just be on the same page. Let's know what's needed, and then let's test messages with folks. What do folks care about? Again, what are the broader values? Oh, is a greener, more walkable Ottawa going to help businesses attract and maintain talent? All right, now we're talking about something else. Or provincially, all right, heat pumps, we're not going to, like, I don't see a path to 20,000 deep retrofits per year and 500,000 heat pumps, without major change. But if you get into wonky terms like non-wire solutions, and looking at what Amory Lovins talked about in the 80s of megawatts, and looking at energy conservation as a resource, as infrastructure investment, maybe there's, federal and provincial infrastructure investment in energy infrastructure that, that's in our homes. And so, again, sorry to, say, I don't know exactly, but those are some of the things that we're wrestling with on that front.
When I appreciate that answer. Thank you. When I converted my oil furnace to natural gas 8 years ago, I save at least $1,000 a year in a cheaper fuel source and an efficient furnace. So for me, that investment was a no-brainer. Now it's, if we use that same sort of strategy with the public on going to a heat pump, you can make the same types of arguments. So I think we can be successful in that regard. The last thing I'll just plant with my colleagues is this: for those of us who are coming back the next term of council, the issue with heat pumps in my ward has been where they are installed in proximity to the neighbor's house. Heat pumps can generate some noise, and we don't have a bylaw that dictates where they are installed. And I think if we are going to roll this out at much greater quantities that we need to, we as a council need to have some sort of, outline of where these are installed. Not to make it difficult, but to ensure that, in dense neighborhoods, we don't have some of the issues that I've seen that have actually ended up in court between neighbors, and we don't want that. Victoria has a bylaw that addresses this, and this is something I want us to talk about more next term of council. But Mr. Winkleman, thank you for your presentation.
One more comment, if I might.
Yeah.
The other, one of the challenges of the heat pumps right now, like everything, there's a supply chain challenge. I said to Minister Wilkinson a couple months, I ran into him at a reception in Vancouver. I'm like, why don't we make a Canadian heat pump? Like, we need millions of these. Like, why not, make it domestically? It's not high tech. But the workforce issue, HVAC contractors, one may want to sell you a boiler and an air conditioner. Two may not have that experience with heat pumps. So there's some workforce training in this space that's important for folks to better understand on that. And 500,000 heat pumps, 20,000 retrofits, that's a lot of jobs for local trades. And that's an important dimension to consider as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Winkleman. That was, I get inspired just hearing the overall picture about what we can do and what we should be doing. There's some great initiatives there. I appreciate the work you're doing with Ottawa Community Housing. I'm on the board for Ottawa Community Housing, and I think that's great, the idea of car sharing, because parking lots are a real big problem. And it's such an obvious solution that is happening in large cities where you have density. So I'm excited about that. Another thing I'm working on with them is to encourage the equity passes and the passes that we have for transit, so that they promote them, because people are already qualified because of their income levels, since they're going into Ottawa Community Housing. So that's another thing we can do is have these working together of OC Transpo and OCH to encourage people to apply. So anyway, I appreciate your work on that. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a motion that comes on after you, and it's about solar panels on the roofs for a project to do, starting with 3 on municipal buildings, and just wanted your feedback on that.
Thank you for the question. I think that's great, and I would say I'm meeting with Bryce Conrad tomorrow, and one of the ideas I'm going to sort of tease out is, how do we do things that are, really integrative? And so could we look at a electric neighborhood where you're bringing in the photovoltaics, and you're bringing in the storage, and you're bringing in the heat pumps, and car charging, and bike charging, so that we're looking at both how do you do these things at scale, and anywhere you're putting solar panels is going to be helpful, but we're doing it to, like, look, I want to pat myself on the back and have things to brag about. We all sort of need that. But how is it informing and inspiring scale up? And so where is it showing, if we're saying on the one hand, electrify everything, on the other hand, we know climate change is a threat multiplier to the things that cause power outages, such as extreme weather events and sort of more heat. So we're putting more load on the grid. If we focus some of these efforts in a particular area, we can also then make the case of what else is needed to really scale this significantly in terms of investment in the grid, in terms of investment in storage, in terms of investments in efficiency. So using those, I'd say, using everything as that step to sort of go deeper and figure out what else is needed. But the combination of solar and EV and some storage is great. So I'm excited to hear about that moving forward.
Thank you. And I should mention that it got amended to include wind. But one of the criticisms I've heard on the motion is that it takes a longer time for payback for the structure of the solar panels, and in terms of how much it costs and how many years it takes to gain back. But I wanted your feedback on that. That was on the the side of you have to look at both sides of the scale. But do you have any comments on that?
I keep that expertise in Janice Ashworth's brain. I would call Janice from the city to sort of understand that in terms of how those costs pan out. But I think she's told me there's pretty interesting payback on photovoltaic, and I would almost look at it in terms of what is the value of that building and what is the resilience value, and does that help the building stay occupiable in terms of if there's an extreme event or some sort of other outage. So I don't know those numbers offhand, but my understanding is there's a decent payback for PV. What I would just say is, again, put PV in your roof. Again, I'm teasing my friends in the green bubble a little bit, and I'm in there myself. But hey, I've got a greenhouse, but the heat pump, you can't put that outside. No one knows what it is. So how does that investment help sort of look at the broader system? And certainly, the more efficient and thermally efficient that building is, then even more value out of that investment in PV. But my understanding is it's a good investment, and certainly as we see carbon prices escalating, it's going to get better and better.
Anyway, I appreciate all your feedback, and I liked your line about laughing at ourselves, and Scott's leading the charge on that. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Steve. So we'll go two more councillors here. Councillor McKenney.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Steve, for this presentation. I have to say that it's going through it. I mean, obviously, we're all focused on, building a greener city, greener environment, healthier. But it's also, even that aside, it's a kind of place we want to live, right? Like that's nicely dense, that you can get around by bike, by transit, that you live close to other people, that you have clean energy sources. It's just, without even being in that green bubble, I think that we could find a way of creating that scenario that you pretty well lay out in your PowerPoint. I don't know if you meant to do that, but that you could appeal to people in terms of just how they would live day to day, and the benefits of that. I have a question that I don't think has been responded to yet, Steve, because I have conversations with people, they go back and forth, and as you know, Ottawa Community Housing is also looking at a community energy system, district energy system at Gladstone, and the debate between heating and cooling by district energy systems versus air source heat pumps. And I understand what it takes for district energy, but once it's there, it's just a couple of pipes really in our infrastructure that can heat and cool. And I guess my question for you is, I mean, not everybody's going to do this overnight. So today, if everybody did it overnight, I'm guessing we wouldn't have the existing generation capacity to meet everyone's needs of air source heat pumps. But do you see the arc as we increase those with our capacity to meet that generation? Like, is it there, or can it be there? Like, is this realistic that we push everyone towards the heat pumps versus district energy, or should it be a combination of both?
Yeah, thanks, Councilor McKenney for the question. Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, we're in this emergency. We need everything, and we're right now we're not yet at risk of so much adoption of EVs or heat pumps that it's hitting the grid like that. Those will be, I don't say good problems to have, but we need to be looking at how to scale that. The advantage of geothermal and district energy and wastewater heat recovery, are not just the emission reduction, but there's a resilience benefit there too. And so they're still going to use some electricity for some pumping, but less of it. So to the extent and where that makes sense, and it can be very site specific, but it makes a whole lot of sense. So we're, contributing in the city and NCC to measure temperature and flow of wastewater in sort of central Ottawa that can support building decarbonization and intensification, and it's a tremendous approach. And I'm we haven't mapped out sort of how big that resource is. It's not sort of everywhere. It's not going to solve everything, but it's important. And the air source heat pumps, again, they're critical. I mean, they're such an important part of this. So the one piece that I've been excited about, and we're going to do this workshop with Van City Investment Bank around wastewater heat recovery and geo exchange to bring examples from other parts of Canada and within Ottawa where there is wastewater heat recovery or there is district energy. One of the examples I'm really excited about is in Kelowna, BC. This goes back, 5 or 8 years. There's a new subdivision that instead of putting in gas furnaces, they put in a geo-exchange utility, a thermal loop, and everyone got a heat pump, and they pay a monthly fee to do that. And so for a couple of reasons. One, because as much as I love walkable communities, Ottawa's never going to, be Copenhagen or even, Montreal, right? So it's so we need a diversity of solutions. And one of the things we're going to do is bring some examples, suburban, commercial, institutional, of these geo-exchange, and bring some developers and say, what's in your pipeline, and what over the next 1, 2, 3 years might be a chance to bring this in and just sort of do that analysis because of the multiple benefits that it brings. By the way, I'll just say one of the exciting, I've worked in 24 different countries on climate change focused on urban issues. One of the exciting things about Ottawa, because it is urban and suburban and rural, and it's a scale where you can get things done, the things that are going to work in Ottawa are going to be transferable to other parts of Canada and other parts of North America. So thanks to all your leadership and everyone working together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the response. It does make it. Again, it would be a good problem to have, and I think that's the way we need to think about it. So, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. Another board member. We have 4 OCH board members here today, so it's funny that we talk about that, but we're all here. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and that's a good lead into what I wanted to commend Steve, firstly, for a very in-depth report, which is quite excellent and quite illuminating as to the potential of investment opportunities in our city, and especially at OCH. I wanted to commend you for that work around car sharing and beginning that program in the vein of what Councillor Kavanaugh was saying. I'm just wishing that we weren't just piloting and we were just committing to doing more on that. Because I think that there's a tremendous opportunity. I think of car sharing in my own community of Overbrook at the community center, and providing people in high priority neighborhoods with energy efficient mechanisms of transportation that ensure that they don't have to own vehicles. So I'm also very excited about the prospect of the other conversations that you were having with OCH management, potentially around scooters and also around e-bikes and other types of transportation modalities. I think that that's quite exciting. And I'm just hoping that we could see more funding opportunities for both transportation and also net zero buildings with OCH. As you also might know, in Overbrook, there was an investment to pilot net zero buildings in a specific, I guess, typology, row home typology, which has been very powerful as a model to pilot future development. So I'm hoping that once the fund grows, and I'm hoping that we see more investment from senior levels of government in the fund, that definitely institutions such as OCH can take advantage of that. But I really just had one question, and it really stems from the work in equity that you're doing, which I'm really also very excited about. The fact that you're really fostering conversations around climate change and social inclusion to accelerate equitable and effective climate action in Ottawa. I'm really excited by the fact that you're working with a number of social inclusion groups, equity seeking groups, to ensure that they're involved in the process that they're attempting to build understanding and foster partnerships and ultimately joint fundraising. So I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, I know it might be early days in terms of the consultation that you're doing with those equity seeking groups, but at the end of the day, what might we expect in terms of the deliverables, in terms of what communities are working towards achieving after having these conversations?
Great, thanks for the question, and I'm excited about all the OCH representation here. It sort of aligns with what I think of as strategic opportunism. Like, if there's money and interest in one area, great, let's start there. And there's a lot of focus on OCH, and it just ticks so many boxes, including around equity. In the Ottawa Climate Equity Initiative, it was such a pleasure to have a project that wasn't just about outcomes, and it's sort of like, I have a friend who got divorced in his 40s and was going out and like all these dinners. Am I going to marry this person? And it's like all this pressure. It's like, we need space to be together where we can just be people and try to figure stuff out. We overprogrammed that initiative at first. There were too many meetings, but over time people stuck with us. And my key metric on that, Councillor King, was like, at the end of the year, can you pick up the phone because you have an idea, maybe even an embarrassing question, and maybe an opportunity to figure out that collaboration? And so a couple of things coming out of that. I'd have to pull up my notes, but I think it's Acorn and Cowie looking at engaging folks on affordable, sort of low carbon housing in walkable communities. And I'm forgetting a couple of the details. There's, out of the Sustainable Eastern Ontario, there's a Francophone network of environmental groups that's looking at just some basic engagement on environment. I don't have to explain, if you're just trying to pay the bills, you're not thinking about environment. On the other hand, you may have family in the Caribbean or in other parts of the world who are feeling sort of climate change impacts, and sort of try to help make some of those connections. And we had an ad in a Chinese newspaper, like, are we reaching the right communities for people to understand how to access like Better Homes Loan Program or things like this? So collaboration around engaging the Francophone community around low carbon housing, and then continuing engagement around green workforce. And the YMCA is doing some really interesting training for new immigrants. Olaf's been involved. That's a place that I'm particularly excited about, because the workforce is graying out, is getting old, is not diverse, needs to grow, and what an exciting opportunity to sort of get those skills. But I can tell you that Hindia Mahmood from Olaf, like, what do you care about? Jobs. You didn't have to think about it, jobs. And Steve, I don't need to tell you there'll be 10,000 green jobs in 10 years. Like, we need them now. And so figuring out, aligning those training programs with the jobs, some of those practical things I think are quite important. But sometimes it's simple things, just making sure that the city's resources are translated into other languages. And I guess, and you attended our outdoor workshop at Son about Rudin from Ecology Ottawa. I mean, the language that keeps coming to the fore is, meet people where they're at. And we did some workshops with Jacques Combit with seniors, like, go there. They're not going to come to some workshop, or tradespeople aren't going to come to some, afternoon training. Like, meet people on the work site. So it's figuring out what people care about, where you can engage with them. Those are some of the things coming forward, and you'll see a more thorough summary in the next week or so. But more importantly, again, as I said, there's going to be all this federal money coming, and I'll be honest. I try to do that as much as I can. But when Rob Barnes at Ecology in Ottawa and I were cranking out this proposal, we reached out to Jocko Comité, who we didn't know, and said, would this be, who, for those who don't know, who engage Ottawans of African and Caribbean descent, that don't do a lot of environmental work, but needed them at the table, wanted those voices at the table. And Ken Campbell's like, all right, young people care about this, it's interesting, so let's join that conversation. And I find, sorry, I'm going too personal here, but I think we're all sort of contextually shy. And what I saw at that last meeting, people, instead of worrying about what words should I use, am I using the right label, am I going to offend someone's like, if you get to know each other, and Councillor King, if I say something offensive, I'm hoping you'll say, Steve, when you say it like that, that bothers me, but you know me, or so we're building some sort of trust. And I think getting beyond, I'm American originally, I grew up in Detroit, so there's a level of Canadian politesse that I don't exactly culturally, relate to, being a bit more sort of straightforward, but like help people overcome those barriers, get to know each other, and then you can pick up the phone, and then you can say, hey, there's this proposal coming, and I'm not scrambling for a tokenistic, like I need Assembly for 7 Generations, I need Indigenous youth. Like, we know each other. Here's this opportunity that builds upon what we were doing before. So it sounds very Pollyannish, and some of it is, but so much of the funding in this place is sort of so outcome oriented that folks appreciated the chance to get to know each other and work together. So next week or so, we'll be sending around and make sure this committee sees the outcomes, the outputs of that project.
No, I appreciate that insight, and I don't think it's Pollyannish to really work towards building trust with different groups. We often are focused on social equity, but of course, part and parcel of that is environmental equity. And I think it's important to have the conversations that you're starting to have with these organizations. Is we haven't had those conversations in the city before around really motivating environmentally conscious behavior and also advancing equitable low carbon solutions. And I think most importantly, as you're saying, to really build wealth potential for high priority communities' jobs. Like you said, we know that there's going to be a deficit in the number of highly skilled people who will be able to undertake building retrofits and other tasks. And so that's definitely a no-brainer in terms of creating economic opportunities for high priority neighborhoods. So I really want to thank you for taking this very innovative approach towards working collaboratively with many communities across the city to engage climate change issues. It's much appreciated, as well as your presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moffat, would you indulge me one more comment?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
The other level of relationship that I think is awkward in Ottawa is environmental groups and developers. We don't want to get in bed with developers. We can't, we know what the private sector will build based on current market incentives. And the numbers I shared, and Councillor Menard, you helped sort of dig up of, we're essentially subsidizing greenfield development and making it harder to do infill. So we've got to find those private sector partners and help develop that business case so that there can be a profit for low carbon housing, hopefully affordable housing, and figure out how to build those trust relationships between community and developers. And that'll be part of our common ground approach as well, because, no one can do it on their own. I mean, Councillor Moffat, you're saying at the beginning, consumers can't, government can't, the private sector can't, but together we can at least do a lot more. And so we just wanted to bring that piece. OCAF strives to collaborate with public-private philanthropic community. We don't have to agree with everyone all the time. We expect to sort of support and challenge our colleagues, and expect to be supported and challenged, by them. So again, appreciate the chance to respond. My presentation will be sent, and happy to, to follow up with any of you as you're interested.
Thanks for that, Steve. I appreciate that. I think the context of your discussion and how you approach things, I think, is important for us. I think we sometimes get caught up with, somewhat divisive arguments and us versus them situations on many issues. And I think it's important that we're all we're all really pulling in the same direction. We might have different philosophies about how to get there or what we need to do in the meantime, but I think it's important that we do have those cooperations. You look at, planning committee, we've had some builders who have been very forthcoming at working on an affordable housing aspect, others not. It just doesn't mean that one's bad and one's good. We have to look at the ones that are helping out and keep on building that and seeing how we can transform that across other sectors and other builders and other different things like that, so we can keep moving this forward in a positive manner. I don't blame you for growing up in those hot summers in Detroit. It's 90 degrees in Detroit. You look across to Windsor and it's 33. I don't blame you for not coming to Canada too often. That's a big shock to the system. So, but no, I appreciate all the work that you do. I really like the way you frame things. I think it's important. We'll often hear that we should be doing more. I think the importance with OCAF is not just telling us that we should be doing more, but trying to figure out how we can and how do we get there and the things that we need to do. I think your straightforward approach to some of the topics and some of the realities that we deal with are important to talk about here as well. The green bubble, it exists, right? And the reality is, from a voter perspective, that green bubble is smaller than the transit bubble. It's smaller than the lower taxes bubble. It's smaller than the I want my roads fixed bubble. So these issues don't always rise up to the top of elections. That's why it's important for leaders to be able to embed those issues in all the other issues. That we can't go to doors always and sit there and pretend that the person we're talking to cares about this bigger picture item, because often they don't. They care about the thing that matters to them the most, which is why it's so important when we talk about cost of housing, cost of home heating, and how you can do this climate piece over here. It actually means that you're benefiting yourself as well and your future finances. And I think that's where we have to frame it to make sure that we're getting people on the same page so we can all move forward. And I remember saying to one delegation once when we had, I can't remember if it was climate change master plan or energy evolution, but it was even if you don't believe in climate change, the worst outcome of this is that we're going to have a more efficient city that costs less to run. It's not. That's the worst case scenario for that situation. So I think it's important that we keep on having these conversations, and I know OCAF is a big part of that. So Steve, just thanks for taking the time to come here. Thanks for listening to members of the committee and answering their questions, and look forward to continuing to work together in at least in the rest of my time here, but then beyond that too.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to being in touch.
Thanks, Steve. And thank you to members of council for your indulgence to allow that presentation. I know it's not the norm as to what we do here at the committee, but I thought it was important context, just because we do talk about there's so much more that has to be done that isn't just the city's responsibility, that we need these partners, we need other people to collaborate with. And I think it's important context for what we do at this committee to have that conversation with outside partners as to what's happening here. So appreciate that. So if we can receive that report. Thank you so much. We move on to item 2, which was teased a little bit during that discussion from Councillor Kavanagh. So it is a motion that was referred to us. So I'll allow Councillor Kavanagh. I know it's on the agenda from Councillor Menard, but obviously it's through Councillor Kavanagh, or directly from Councillor Kavanagh and through Councillor Menard. So I'll go to Councillor Kavanagh to speak to it, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to Councillor Menard for putting this forward on my behalf. Very much appreciated. Now, when we look at the climate change master plan and our whole goals, we needed some concrete ideas of what we're going to do next, and it is important to look at renewable energy. This is an opportunity to do it on our own buildings. So we're not just telling the people out there what to do, we're doing it ourselves, and we're leading by example. So I think this is important. I appreciate the work and collaboration with city staff who've looked at this, and the collaboration as well with Hydro Ottawa. who are in partnership with this, since it is about energy. And it's a start. It's still, it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. So we need to keep working away at this, and we want to reach our goals. As was just said in the last presentation, carbon down. So I'm hoping this will be a great example of carbon down. I also want to give thanks to cafes, Angela Keller Herzog, who also approached me on this, and I think it was important, and that's why I agreed to put forward a motion. And I'm happy it's coming here to Environment Committee. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to ask a question of staff. So we get these, we have these conversations often, and quite often, when you dig into it, it's very consistent with what we're already doing. So we talked about today, climate change master plan, energy evolution. We've talked about these things before, but sometimes there are certain words that elicit negative feedback. And we have had a lot of conversation at this committee and at planning committee when we were doing the official plan about wind in the rural area. It's something that we know is sensitive to our rural communities. There's one thing that you'll have to worry about seeing in a built-up neighborhood, and it's two things really. You'll have to worry about seeing a landfill open up next door to your house, and you'll have to worry about having a industrial scale wind turbine in an urban setting. These things exist in the rural area, and it's a sensitive matter. We've had proposals in the past. Really, what it came down to is Ottawa doesn't have the wind regime to support what we've seen in the past, but nonetheless, the concerns still rise. And I've made it clear in the past to rural associations and community members that the city itself is not out there, exploring opportunities to stick wind turbines in your backyard. But we'd also be foolish to think that this is not something that could happen in the future. As it stands today, there is no ability to apply for an industrial wind turbine in the province of Ontario. That application process no longer exists in the province, but it likely will come in the future. We've made some commitments to looking at setbacks in the zoning bylaw when that time comes next term of council. Also through the official plan, ensuring that these things don't occupy prime agricultural land in the rural area as well. Now, this is all contingent on the province actually listening to us and actually embedding that, because we know that the previous act did not listen to municipalities and did not give us deference in any way, shape, or form when it came to where wind turbines are sited. We know that municipalities have fought against that in the past. But we also know that there's a lot of other renewable energy sources that have no opposition and are quite popular and also effective. So just a quick question to staff, whoever might be here, if it's Janice Ashworth or Andrew Flowers or whoever, that what we're doing here doesn't change what we've said in the past when it comes to wind in the rural area.
I can take that, Chair. What we've put forward as part of this motion as a broader picture is that if there are sufficient resources, we would look at a distributed energy resource for city-owned facilities and land. And we have explicitly said that that would include renewable energy generation, both wind and solar, as we've specified in energy evolution. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are supporting turbines in backyards where it's not being asked for, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to end up with that in this motion. But we need to understand what our options are, because technology is getting better in low wind areas like Ottawa, and the technologies are changing, and some of those technology changes address concerns that we've heard from a range of people. So through a combination of working with zoning and with the distributed energy resources, we'll work through those challenges.
Okay, and I mean, I think it's important to know too that when you talk about technologies, one of the challenges we had with the North Core application, this is about a dozen years ago, was that the wind turbines proposed there were significantly higher than what we see elsewhere in Ontario. So obviously that's a bigger impact. And the setbacks at the time were quite minimal, which is what created that concern in that community. I think we will see the changes, and we won't see those types of impacts be as great in the future. But I mean, I think the concern's still there, and the trepidation from our communities is still there because of what they remember and what that system was, and how low involvement they had with the decision-making process, how we as councillors had no ability to represent them. And the system was really set up to supersede communities and not involve them. So I think that's just where I want to make sure as a city, we aren't making those same mistakes that previous governments have made, and that we don't have situations where rural communities feel that they're left out of the conversation, and that the city is just going to come in and do whatever we feel necessary from that one perspective on wind. Because I don't get the feedback on any other energy generation technology. It is specifically about wind, and I know that my rural colleagues hear the same. So we just want to make sure that we're one city. I don't want to see us pitting communities against one another, and that is inherently what happened in the past on this file, through no fault of anyone here. That's all. I just want to make that clear. Something to consider in the future as we go through this. But again, even if somebody wanted to build a wind turbine in Ontario right now, you couldn't do it. Okay, thanks. Any questions, comments on the motion? I know many of you have seen it because you were at council that day and I wasn't. So on the motion from Councillor Kavanagh through Councillor Menard, is that carried?
Carried.
All right, thanks. And so that means there'll be some discussion upcoming just on the solar panel piece and the working group, but then there will be more coming back next term of council for further discussion, which again is in line with what we expect from energy evolution and our climate change master plan. And that's that for the regular agenda. Notices of motion. I know we have two, one from Councillor McKenney and one from Councillor Menard. So we'll go to Councillor McKenney first, just because I like them better.
Not a surprise. Because you've known me longer, like a lot longer.
It's true. It's true. However, I will say it is true, but Councillor Menard donated to my 2014 campaign and you didn't. So maybe I should
reevaluate that.
Yeah.
I also I think went to a house party Scott held in high school way back when. Back in the, I think so. Anyway, I was at your house and may not have known it.
Is there video?
Stop recording. Stop recording. No.
I'm not adding any more to that conversation. Here we go. Whereas the scientific consensus is clear that human activities, including fossil fuel extraction and production, are primarily responsible for accelerating global climate change, and whereas the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported in 2022 that we must have our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in order to have a reasonable chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And whereas global governments and the fossil fuel industry are currently planning to produce about 110% more emissions by 2030 than what is needed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avert catastrophic climate disruption. And such plans risk undoing the work of our city to reduce GHG emissions through energy evolution. And whereas changes in the City of Ottawa's climate are already being felt through hotter summers and increased frequency of major flooding events, and whereas the City of Ottawa declared a climate emergency on April 24th, 2019, with the purpose of naming, framing, and deepening our commitment to protecting our economy, our ecosystems, and our community from climate change. And whereas the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure and expanded reliance on fossil fuels exposes communities to untenable risks to public health and safety at the local and global levels, And the time is now to phase out fossil fuels and build a globally just transition for every worker, community, and country. And whereas a new global initiative is underway calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty that would end new fossil fuel exploration and expansion, phase out existing production in line with the global commitment to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and accelerate equitable transition plans, which complements the objective of the Paris Agreement. And whereas endorsing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty reaffirms the city's commitment to energy evolution, whereas over 50 cities and local governments globally, including Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, have formally endorsed the treaty. Therefore, be it resolved that the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water, and Waste Management recommend that Ottawa City Council formally endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And be it further resolved that the Mayor, on behalf of Council and the City of Ottawa, send a letter from the Mayor to the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Ontario, urging the Canadian and Ontario governments to support the global initiative for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. That'll come back next meeting.
That's correct. And Councillor Menard, the other notice of motion.
Here. So I circulated this to council yesterday, so people have seen it, but I will read it out. Whereas the city's urban forest management plan approved by council on June 28th, 2017 was established to provide a structured approach to protecting and enhancing the environmental, social, and economic services provided by the urban forest and to ensure that it is healthy and robust into the future. And whereas the city's urban forest management plan included a recommendation for staff to undertake a tree bylaw review. And whereas council approved a new tree bylaw protection on January 29th, 2020 to support the protection and enhancement of the city's urban tree canopy. And whereas a motion was passed by council on June 24th, 2020 to amend the tree protection bylaw to reduce the diameter of a distinctive tree within the inner urban area from 50 centimeters to 30 centimeters in diameter at breast height. And a report was subsequently approved by council to make that amendment on November 24th, 2020. And whereas in the suburban area of Ottawa, the distinctive tree diameter is currently set at 50 centimeters in diameter at breast height at the tree protection bylaw. And whereas the value of the tree canopy in the suburban area should be reflected equally within the provisions of the tree protection bylaw. And whereas there is value in streamlining the provisions for distinctive trees within the tree protection bylaw to reduce resident confusion and to encourage compliance with the bylaw, therefore be it resolved that the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water, and Waste Management recommend council direct staff to consult with the public and bring forward a report in Q2 2023 to amend the tree protection bylaw to reduce the size of distinctive tree in the suburban area of Ottawa from 50 to 30 centimeters in diameter measured at breast height. So that'll come back, see how the consultation goes and amendments that may come with it. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. So both those motions, as mentioned, will be on our June committee meeting agenda. I encourage anyone to reach out to staff on those, especially on the to more about the tree bylaw. The process is similar to what we did in the past. So if you have questions on that, speak with Martha Copestake, who I know works closely with Councilor Mera on that motion, but also is working heavily on all tree policy in the city of Ottawa to make sure that we are protecting our tree canopy and enhancing it. So questions to Martha would be advisable so that you can prepare for coming to committee next month. Okay, that's it for notice of motion. Inquiries? Anyone? Inquiries? Inquire about something? No? Okay. Other business? Seeing none. Adjournment. Our next meeting is Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
You as well.
Everyone, bonne journée.